11 beavers, that's the whole starting point, released into a Scottish valley in 2009 after 4 centuries with none in the country at all. Today, researchers count more than 2,000. Nobody planned for that number. The engineers who reviewed the release called it a waste of effort. The land was too degraded, the rivers too altered, 11 animals too few to matter. People living nearby expected them to starve out within the year. None of that happened. Within 72 hours of release, the first dam went up. No contractor, no blueprint, no funding application. 2 animals working through the night on a stretch of river that hadn't held a dam in 400 years. Hold on to that detail, it matters later. Here's what you need going in. By the time this story starts, most people in Scotland had forgotten what a healthy river even looked like. Straight channels, fast runoff, bare banks. That wasn't the natural state of things. That was just what remained after centuries without the one species that had built and maintained the system in the first place. So when 11 beavers went back into that valley, the engineers, the farmers, even the government scientists assigned to monitor them, were working from the wrong baseline entirely. The population didn't just hold on, it exploded, and buried inside a university dataset that almost nobody outside the research team ever read. There's a number that would eventually force a change in UK law. That number is coming, but first, you need to see what 11 animals actually built, because it's bigger than anyone on that project expected. Picture this valley in 2008, a river running straight as a ruler, fast and shallow, carrying away every drop of rain before the land could use it. No wetland, no standing water, 400 years of silence where a keystone species used to be. Now picture it today, slow water, standing pools, a landscape rebuilt from the ground up. The cause, 11 animals. In May 2009, conservationists released 11 Eurasian beavers into Knapdale Forest, the first wild beaver release in Britain in over 400 years. The response was swift and skeptical. Engineers called it wasted funding. Farmers downstream predicted flooded fields and a dead population by winter. They had reason to doubt. Nobody alive had seen a beaver-shaped river. There was no local precedent, no safety net. Then, within 72 hours, the first dam appeared. Not engineered, not funded, built overnight by 2 animals on a river that hadn't held one in 4 centuries. That should have ended the argument. It only opened a bigger question: what happens when you hand a dying landscape back to the species that built it? If stories like this hold your attention, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more of this transformation still to come. Before a single beaver touched Scottish water, there was a different battle, fought in offices, not rivers. The proposal sat with the Scottish government for years before it cleared. Officials weren't just worried about beavers, they were worried about precedent. Approve this, and you reopen a 400-year-old question: who gets to decide what belongs on the land? Farmers pushed back hardest. Beavers don't just build dams, they burrow into riverbanks, fell trees, and reshape drainage patterns nobody had touched in generations. To a landowner staring at a flooded field, that's not restoration. That's a threat to a livelihood. The compromise that finally passed wasn't a celebration. It was a contract with an exit clause, a strictly monitored 5-year trial run by the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, with the explicit understanding that if the beavers caused serious damage, they would be removed. Conditional, reversible, watched closely from day one. Nobody signing that approval expected to be running this experiment indefinitely. They expected a controlled test that would likely end on schedule. What they got instead started reshaping the landscape almost immediately, and the data collectors weren't ready for what they were about to measure. Within months, Knapdale Forest stopped looking like a forest recovering. It started looking like a forest under construction. The beavers didn't wait for permission to keep working. They felled select trees along the banks, not randomly, but with purpose, opening sunlight to the water and triggering a burst of new shoot growth at the base of every cut trunk. Dead wood became building material, living wood became food, and eventually more building material. Then came the canals. Beavers don't just dam rivers, They dig channels through soft ground to move logs and stay hidden from predators, and those channels filled with water, spreading wet ground further than the original riverbank ever reached. Pool by pool, the dry valley floor disappeared underneath standing water. Reeds moved in. Insects followed the reeds. Birds followed the insects. None of this was designed by a hydrologist. None of it followed an engineering plan. It happened the way it had happened for millions of years before humans drained it away, animal instinct, repeated daily, compounding into a landscape. Researchers watching this unfold weren't just documenting wildlife behavior anymore. They were about to start measuring something with real consequences for human infrastructure, and the first numbers would be hard to argue with. This is where it stopped being a nice story and became a measurable one. Researchers from the University of Exeter spent years monitoring this stretch of river through real storm events, not models, not projections, but actual rainfall hitting actual ground. Upstream of the Beaver dams, water surged. Downstream, where the dams held it back, peak flood flow dropped by up to 60%. 60%, that's the difference between a flooded village and a river that simply slowed down. Concrete flood defenses don't do that. They hold until they fail, then fail all at once. A beaver dam works the opposite way. It leaks, it bends, it lets water through gradually, and when it breaks, the beavers rebuild it within days. If a moment like this is the kind of thing that gets you excited about what nature can actually do, hit that like button. It helps put this in front of more people who'd want to see it. The flood data alone would have justified the entire project, but researchers tracking the river noticed something else moving through those new pools, something that hadn't been seen there in years. Salmon, and what they found next had nothing to do with flooding at all. By 2016, the data had piled up too high to ignore. The flood numbers held. The salmon kept returning. The wetlands kept expanding, season after season, without a single engineer adjusting a single valve. So the Scottish government did something nobody expected from a 5-year experiment with a built-in exit clause. It made the beavers permanent. In November 2016, Eurasian beavers were granted protected species status under European law, the same legal weight given to species the government actively works to preserve, not remove. The exit clause was gone. There would be no removal, no rollback, no return to the straight, silent rivers of 2008. And the population didn't just stabilize. It kept climbing from 11 founding animals to an estimated population now well over 2,000, spread across river systems the original trial never touched. Watch that number again, 11, 2,000, inside less than 2 decades. A species hunted to extinction in Scotland for 400 years had not only returned, it had been formally recognized as essential infrastructure for the landscape it once shaped alone. But Scotland wasn't going to keep this transformation to itself. What happened next would test whether this kind of recovery could work anywhere else in Britain, or whether Knapdale had simply been lucky. What happened in Knapdale wasn't really about beavers. It was about what a landscape does once you stop telling it what to be. For 400 years, the absence of one species had been mistaken for the natural condition of these rivers. Straight channels, fast runoff, dry fields. Nobody questioned it because nobody alive remembered the alternative. That's the actual discovery buried in all of this, not the dams, not the flood numbers, not even the salmon. It's the fact that an entire country had confused a wound for a baseline. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. A degraded valley, 11 animals, a landscape rebuilding itself with no blueprint, a flood risk cut by 60% without a single contractor, a protected status granted not out of sentiment, but because the data left no other honest conclusion to reach. This is what ecological recovery actually looks like when it's allowed to happen, slower than people expect, more thorough than anyone predicted, and almost invisible to the institutions meant to be monitoring it. So here's the question worth sitting with. How many other landscapes have we quietly written off as dead, simply because we forgot what alive was supposed to look like? Scotland isn't keeping this data to itself. Conservationists across Europe are studying it now, and projects built on the Knapdale model are already underway in England and Wales. Different rivers, different politics, the same basic test of whether a keystone species can still do the job nobody else can. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and join us as we keep tracking how animals like these continue reshaping the world around them. 11 beavers didn't just rebuild a valley, they rewrote what an entire country believed was possible.